He said, I'll love you till I die.
For years, fans have admired Alan Jackson as the country music legend with a golden voice, a symbol of American storytelling. But behind the songs and the spotlight, there was a side of him the world never saw. Now, for the first time, his daughter and family are speaking out, revealing the truth that's been hidden for decades. What was life really like behind the scenes? How did fame, family struggles, and personal battles shape the man behind the music? Stay with us as we uncover the real Alan Jackson, his rise to fame, the hardships he and his family faced, and the revelations that have left fans shocked. The truth is finally out, and it changes everything. His daughter and family have finally revealed the truth we always wanted. Alan Jackson's story begins in the small town of Newnan, Georgia, where life was simple and dreams felt a world away. Born to humble beginnings, he was the only boy in a house full of sisters, growing up in a home built around his grandfather's old tool shed. It wasn't much, but to Alan, it was everything: his childhood, his roots, and the foundation for the man he would become. From an early age, music was in his soul, but it wasn't always the path he thought he'd take. Gospel music filled his home, shaping his early love for melody. But it wasn't until he discovered artists like Hank Williams Jr., Gene Watson, and John Anderson that his passion for country music truly ignited. Their voices, their stories, their raw emotion, Alan felt something shift inside him. He realized that music could be more than just a sound. It could be a way to tell the stories of real people, real struggles, real love. Still, the idea of becoming a musician felt distant. Growing up in a small southern town, the road to stardom wasn't something people talked about. It was just a dream, something that happened to other people. Alan spent his early years working odd jobs, including at a local car repair shop, wondering if he'd ever find his true calling. But fate had other plans. When Alan married his high school sweetheart, Denise, his life took a turn he never expected. Denise believed in him in a way he hadn't yet learned to believe in himself. And when she landed a job as a flight attendant, she met someone who would change their lives forever: country music legend Glen Campbell. On a flight, Denise struck up a conversation with Campbell, mentioning her husband's love for music. She didn't know it at the time, but that conversation would set everything in motion. Glen gave her the contact information for his publishing company in Nashville. It was an opportunity, a foot in the door, and for Alan, it was the sign he needed to take a leap of faith. At 27, with nothing but a dream and Denise's unwavering support, Alan packed up and moved to Nashville. He had no industry connections, no safety net, just raw talent and a drive that wouldn't let him quit. He worked tirelessly, performing wherever he could, writing songs that captured the heartache, hope, and hardships of everyday life. The breakthrough came in 1989 when he signed with Arista Records, a moment that changed everything. A year later, his debut single, Blue-Blooded Woman, hit the airwaves. It wasn't a massive success, but it was a start. And then came Here in the Real World, the song that put Alan Jackson on the map. It was a heartfelt ballad, a song that spoke to the realities of love and life, and it resonated with country music fans across the nation. That was only the beginning. Alan followed up with hit after hit: Wanted, Chasin' That Neon Rainbow, and I'd Love You All Over Again, each one proving that he was here to stay. His sophomore album, Don't Rock the Jukebox, catapulted him even higher, solidifying his place as a new force in country music. Songs like Someday and Midnight in Montgomery paid tribute to his roots and to the legends that came before him. including Hank Williams, whose influence had shaped Alan's love for traditional country music. But it was Chattahoochee that truly made him a household name. The song, an ode to growing up in the South, became one of the biggest country hits of the 90s. With its upbeat rhythm and nostalgic lyrics, it captured the spirit of young love, carefree summers, and the small-town charm that Alan knew so well. Despite his growing success, Alan never lost sight of who he was. He stayed true to his sound, refusing to chase trends or compromise his authenticity. In an era where country music was starting to drift toward pop influences, Alan stood firm. His music was country, pure and simple. Then, in 2001, the world changed forever. The September 11th attacks shook the nation, leaving millions searching for answers, for comfort, for something to hold on to. In the midst of that grief, Alan wrote "Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning?", a song that captured the heartbreak and confusion of that day. It wasn't political. It wasn't forced. It was a genuine expression of sorrow, faith, and hope. The song struck a chord with America, earning Alan his first Grammy and cementing his place as one of the greatest storytellers in country music history. Alan Jackson's rise to fame wasn't overnight, and it wasn't easy. It was built on years of dedication, on staying true to his roots, on writing music that mattered. His songs weren't just hits. They were stories that fans could see themselves in. He wasn't just a singer. He was one of them. A man who had lived the life he sang about, who had struggled, loved, lost, and found his way through music. But behind the success, behind the awards and sold-out concerts, was a man whose personal life wasn't as perfect as it seemed. His journey to the top had come with its own set of challenges, struggles that would test his marriage, his family, and his faith. And as his career soared, the cracks in his personal life began to show. For nearly 50 years, Alan and Denise Jackson's love story has been seen as a fairy tale. High school sweethearts who built a life together, stood by each other through the highs and lows, and never let go. But behind the perfect image, behind the smiles on red carpets and the love songs that melted hearts, their reality was far more complicated. When Alan's career took off, it changed everything. The small-town boy who once struggled to believe in himself had become one of the biggest names in country music. The fame, the fortune, the endless touring. It was a dream come true. But for Denise, it was also the beginning of a nightmare. She had always imagined they'd share the journey together, side by side, that she would be there with him, experiencing the magic, watching him live out his dreams. Instead, she often found herself alone. Alan was constantly on the road, and the pressures of fame began to pull them in different directions. The man she had married, the man she had known since she was just a teenager, was slipping away. At first, she convinced herself it was just part of the lifestyle. Late nights, exhausting schedules, the weight of being a celebrity. It was all overwhelming. But deep down, something didn't feel right. And soon, her worst fears were confirmed. Alan had been unfaithful. The man who had once promised to love her forever, the man she had built her entire world around, had betrayed her. It wasn't just the pain of infidelity, it was the realization that the life she had fought so hard to build was crumbling beneath her. Denise was heartbroken, humiliated, and lost. She had spent years supporting Alan, believing in his dream, putting him first. And now, everything she had sacrificed felt meaningless. She struggled to understand why. Why wasn't she enough? Why had he risked everything? For the first time in their marriage, they separated. It was a brief 3 months, but in those months, everything changed. Alan was forced to look at himself, at his choices, at the man he had become. He had everything he had ever wanted: fame, success, admiration, but he was losing the one thing that truly mattered. Denise, too, had to do some soul-searching. She had spent so much of her life making Alan her priority that she had forgotten about herself. She had believed in the fairy tale, in the idea that her husband would always be her rock, her security, the one to complete her. But now, she realized that no one, not even Alan Jackson, could be everything to her. One night, alone in her car, the weight of it all became too much. She broke down, sobbing, feeling like she had nothing left to give. She prayed, not just for her marriage, but for herself. She asked God for guidance, for strength, for clarity. And in that moment, she found something she hadn't felt in years: peace. Denise realized that she had been trying to control everything, trying to fix everything, trying to hold on to something that was already slipping away. But she couldn't fix Alan. She couldn't change the past. The only thing she could do was let go and trust that whatever happened next was meant to be. It wasn't easy. Healing never is. But slowly, they began to rebuild. Alan had to prove he was worthy of her trust again, and Denise had to learn to love herself outside of being Alan Jackson's wife. She channeled her pain into something greater: her faith, her writing, her desire to help others. She wrote It's All About Him, a deeply personal book about their marriage, their struggles, and the power of forgiveness. But the title wasn't about Alan. It was about God, about learning that true love, true fulfillment, doesn't come from another person, but from faith. Through their darkest moments, they found something stronger than the hurt: grace. And while their love story may not have been the fairy tale Denise once imagined, it became something even more powerful. A story of resilience, redemption, and the unbreakable bond that kept them together, even when everything else was falling apart. For fans, Alan Jackson's songs tell stories of heartbreak and healing, love and loss. But perhaps the greatest story of all is the one he lived: the story of a man who nearly lost it all, and the woman who chose to believe in love, even when it hurt the most. It was supposed to be a celebration, a romantic getaway to mark another year of love, commitment, and resilience. After everything Alan and Denise had been through, they had come out stronger, closer. But life has a way of throwing the unexpected at you when you least expect it. During their anniversary trip to Florida in 2010, Denise received a phone call that changed everything. On the other end of the line was her doctor, delivering news she never imagined she would hear. She had colon cancer. The words didn't seem real. She was healthy, active, full of life. She exercised, ate well, and took care of herself. Cancer wasn't supposed to happen to her, and yet it had. Alan watched the love of his life, the woman who had always been his rock, grapple with the unthinkable. He had built his life around storytelling, putting emotions into lyrics. But in that moment, he had no words. For the first time, he was faced with something he couldn't fix, something that money, success, and fame couldn't change. The man who had stood on stage in front of thousands, who had faced the highs and lows of fame, suddenly felt helpless. He could write a song about heartbreak, but this wasn't the kind of heartbreak that could be healed with music. This was real. This was terrifying. They packed up and left Florida immediately, cutting their trip short. The celebration was over. Back in Nashville, Denise met with specialists, determined to face the battle ahead. The days that followed were a blur of doctor visits, tests, and terrifying possibilities. Denise was no stranger to hardship. She had weathered storms before. But this time, she wasn't just fighting for her marriage, for her family, or for her happiness. She was fighting for her life. The treatment began. Grueling rounds of chemotherapy, exhausting days of radiation. She lost weight, felt weak, and endured pain unlike anything she had ever known. The woman who had once fought for her marriage was now fighting to stay alive. And through it all, Alan never left her side. The man who had once been lost in the world of fame and temptation now had one singular focus: his wife. For years, Denise had been the strong one, the steady one. Now, it was Alan's turn to be the rock. He sat by her bedside, held her hand through the worst of it, and reminded her every day that she was not alone. And as the months dragged on, Alan did the only thing he knew how to do. He turned to music. Late at night, when the world was quiet and the weight of his fears became too much to bear, he sat down and began to write. The words poured out of him, a reflection of his deepest pain, his desperation, his love for the woman who had been his anchor. The song, "When I Saw You Leaving," was born, a hauntingly beautiful tribute to the battle Denise was fighting, to the helplessness he felt watching her suffer. The lyrics were raw, deeply personal. It wasn't just about Denise. It was about every person who had ever watched someone they love face a battle they couldn't control. It was about the fear of losing the one person who meant everything. When Denise finally finished treatment, the news they had prayed for arrived. She was cancer-free. The relief was overwhelming, the gratitude immeasurable. But Denise knew her journey wasn't just about survival. It was about purpose. She had been given a second chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. She began using her platform to raise awareness about colon cancer, speaking out about the importance of early detection. She wanted to help others avoid the pain she had endured. Alan, too, knew that their story could make a difference. In 2013, he performed "When I Saw You Leaving" at Stars Go Blue, a benefit concert dedicated to raising funds and awareness for colon cancer. The moment was powerful, one of the most emotional performances of his career. As Alan stood on stage, singing words that had come from his darkest fears, Denise sat in the audience, alive, strong, and more determined than ever. Their story was no longer just about a marriage that had endured. It was about life, about second chances, about finding strength in the hardest moments. Denise had beaten cancer, but more than that, she had turned her pain into purpose. She had proven, once again, that no matter how dark the road gets, there is always light on the other side. And Alan, the man who had almost lost her, would never take a single moment for granted again. For decades, Alan Jackson was the picture of strength, commanding the stage with his smooth voice and timeless presence. His performances felt effortless, his connection with fans unbreakable. But behind the scenes, something had been changing. His body was betraying him in ways he never expected. For years, he kept it hidden. The unsteady steps, the occasional stumble, the way his legs felt weaker than they should. He brushed it off at first. Maybe it was just age, maybe exhaustion from years of touring. But deep down, he knew something wasn't right. Then came the diagnosis: Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, a name that most people had never heard of, but for Alan, it explained everything. A hereditary nerve disorder passed down through his family. His father had it. His grandmother had it. Even his older sister had it. And now, it was his turn to face it. Unlike many diseases, CMT doesn't come with a cure. There's no surgery to fix it, no medication to stop it in its tracks. It attacks the nerves in the hands, feet, and legs, slowly weakening the muscles and making even the most basic movements difficult. Over time, it steals balance, coordination, and mobility. By the time Alan finally told the world in 2021, he had already been battling it for over a decade. He had stayed quiet, not wanting pity, not wanting to make excuses. But as the years went on, it became impossible to hide. Fans began to notice the way he held onto the microphone stand just a little tighter, the way his steps seemed slower, more deliberate, the way he sometimes stumbled, struggling to keep his footing. He could no longer ignore it, and so he finally spoke out. "It won't kill me," he admitted in an interview, "but it will disable me over time." Those words hit hard. For a man who had spent his life standing tall on the biggest stages, who had built a career on live performances, the reality of what lay ahead was devastating. CMT doesn't affect the voice, and for that, he was grateful. His ability to sing, to tell stories through music, remained untouched. But the stage, the place that had been his home for so many years, was becoming harder and harder to navigate. Alan had always been a performer who moved with ease, his presence filling every inch of the space around him. But now, every step took effort. Every performance required careful planning. For someone like Alan, someone who had built a career on authenticity, there was no hiding it anymore. And he didn't want to. He didn't want fans to wonder, to speculate. He wanted them to know the truth. He wasn't ready to retire, not yet. He loved music too much to walk away, but he knew things were changing. The days of long tours, of endless travel, of performing night after night, those days were numbered. His concerts would look different. He might need to sit more, to rely on others for support. He might not be able to give fans the same high-energy performances he once did. But what he could give them was his voice, his heart, his music. And that, he hoped, would be enough. Despite the challenges, Alan remained grateful. He had lived a life beyond his wildest dreams. He had built a legacy in country music that no disease could erase. He had written songs that would outlive him, that would continue to tell his story long after he was gone. But most of all, he had his family, his wife, who had stood by him through every high and low, his daughters, who looked up to him not just as a country legend, but as their father, his fans, who had supported him through every moment of his journey. So, he would keep going. As long as he could, as long as his body allowed, he would keep singing. Because music wasn't just his career, it was his life. And no disease, no obstacle could ever take that away. For all the fame, for all the awards, for all the records broken, Alan Jackson has always said that his greatest success isn't in music, it's in family. His 3 daughters, Maddie, Ali, and Danny, are the heart of his world. Through every high and low, through every challenge, they have remained his greatest source of pride. And now, as they step into their own lives, they're sharing the truth about the man behind the music, the father who shaped them, the lessons he left behind, and the legacy that goes far beyond country music. Maddie, Alan's eldest, has lived through more heartache than most people experience in a lifetime. In 2018, her world shattered when she lost her husband, Ben, just months after their wedding. She was only 28 years old. The grief was overwhelming, the pain unbearable. But through it all, she leaned on the lessons her father had taught her: faith, resilience, and the strength to keep going, even when life feels impossible. She poured her heartache into words, writing Lemons on Friday, a deeply personal book about loss, healing, and learning to trust God even in the darkest moments. Alan and Denise wrote the introduction, their words filled with pride and admiration for the daughter who had shown more courage than they could have ever imagined. Then there's Allie, who has always seen her father as more than just a country music icon. To her, he's the man who taught her kindness, respect, and the importance of standing tall in a world that often tries to knock you down. On his birthday, she wrote a tribute that captured everything he had meant to her. Everyone around you recognizes you for what you truly are, a phenomenal singer, songwriter, and performer. But to us, you are the perfect father figure for any girl. Our home was always filled with music and faith, and you made sure we knew that we could do anything we set our minds to. Her words resonated deeply, not just with the family, but with fans who had followed Alan's journey for years. Because beyond the fame, beyond the success, Alan Jackson was something more. He was a father who loved his children fiercely, who raised them with unwavering faith, who instilled in them a belief that they were capable of anything. And then there's Dani, the youngest of the three. Though she stays more out of the public eye, the love between her and her father is undeniable. For Alan, being a father was never about raising them to follow in his footsteps. It was about giving them the foundation to create their own paths. Through faith, through music, through love, he raised them to stand on their own, to believe in themselves, and to always stay true to who they are. And they carry those lessons with them every day. But it's not just his daughters who feel his impact. His music has touched millions, reaching across generations, across backgrounds, across lives. His songs aren't just lyrics and melodies, they are stories, moments, emotions, wrapped in a voice that feels like home. For years, fans have turned to Alan's music in their own times of joy and heartbreak. His words have been the soundtrack to love stories, to breakups, to weddings, to funerals. His songs have been played in quiet moments of reflection, in rowdy moments of celebration. And that, more than anything, is his legacy. Not just the records, not just the awards, but the way his music has made people feel, the way it has connected strangers, healed wounds, brought comfort in moments of loss, and joy in moments of love. Alan Jackson's career is legendary, but his greatest gift is not just the music he created, it's the love he shared, the lessons he passed down, the family he built, and the fans whose lives he touched in ways he never could have imagined. Because long after the stage lights dim, long after the last song is sung, what remains is the impact he left behind. And that is the greatest legacy of all. Every country artist has a hero, someone whose music shaped them, whose voice became the soundtrack to their dreams. For Alan Jackson, that hero was George Jones. From the moment Alan first heard him sing, he knew there was something different about George. It wasn't just the voice. It was the way he sang with raw emotion, the way he lived his music, the way his songs told stories that felt real. Alan didn't just admire him, he wanted to follow in his footsteps. But admiration turned into something more. Over time, Alan and George developed a friendship that went beyond music. Despite being at different points in their careers, George, the seasoned legend with decades of hits, and Alan, the rising star finding his place in the industry, they connected in a way that few understood. George saw in Alan something special, an artist who wasn't chasing trends, who wasn't trying to reinvent country music, but who was dedicated to keeping it pure, to keeping it real. He gave Alan one piece of advice that stuck with him forever: keep it country. And Alan did. Through every album, every song, every performance, he stayed true to the music he loved, never wavering from the traditional sound that made him who he was. But in 1999, country music found itself at a crossroads. That year, George Jones had released Choices, a song that was deeply personal, reflecting on a life filled with ups and downs. It was a song that deserved to be heard in its entirety. But when the Country Music Association invited George to perform at their annual awards show, they told him he could only sing a shortened version. George refused. To him, cutting his song down to fit within their time slot was an insult. If they didn't want to give him the respect he deserved, he wasn't going to show up at all. Alan was furious. He knew what George meant to country music, what he meant to him personally. And so, on the night of the CMAs, Alan took matters into his own hands. He was scheduled to perform Papa Top, one of his own hit songs, but in the middle of his performance, he did something no one expected. He stopped. Right then and there, in front of millions of viewers, he began singing Choices, the very song the CMAs had refused to let George perform in full. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't care about the consequences. He was making a statement, standing up for his hero, letting the world know that George Jones would not be silenced. Then, just as suddenly as he had started, Alan stopped singing, turned, and walked off the stage. The message was loud and clear. George, watching from home, was moved beyond words. He later called Alan to thank him, telling him, "You made this old boy feel real proud last night." That was the kind of bond they had, one built on mutual respect, on a shared love for country music, on an unspoken understanding that real artists stand by each other. Years later, when George Jones passed away in 2013, Alan was one of the few people asked to perform at his funeral. It was a moment he never wanted to face, saying goodbye to the man who had shaped so much of his own journey. As he stood on stage at the Grand Ole Opry house, the weight of the moment settled in. The song he chose was "He Stopped Loving Her Today," George's most famous and beloved song. With every note, every lyric, Alan sang not just as a performer, but as a friend, as a fan, as someone who owed so much to the man he was now paying tribute to. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. But Alan's tribute to George didn't end that day. Every year, on George's birthday, he posts about him, sharing old stories, old memories, keeping his legacy alive. Because for Alan, George Jones wasn't just another country star, he was a guiding force, a reminder of what country music was meant to be. And as long as Alan Jackson has a voice, he will continue to honor the man who told him to keep it country, because that's exactly what he's always done.